1. When I was about 18, I worked as a nursing assistant on a surgical floor. We got a range of patients that varied from gallbladders to knee replacements. I worked with another assistant, and we split the floor in half. She got one hallway, and I got the other. She went on break, so I responded to the call lights in both halls. One of her patients rung out, so I went to help. The lady's son stepped out while I assisted her to the bedside commode. I came out and told him I was done and he could go back in. Instead, he chose to talk to me. We exchanged some small talk, and he went back into the room when his mother called for him. The other assistant came back, and I continued working. I went to chart at the nurse's station, and the son came out and began chatting with me again. I didn't think much of it. It was the middle of the night. Nothing good was on TV at this time, and I assumed he was just bored. I got up to attend my patients, and he followed me, asking lots of questions: how old I was, if I was going to school, how long I had worked here. He even waited outside patients' rooms till I came out. I should have mentioned earlier that this guy did not have the usual creeper vibe. He was a clean-cut guy, perhaps in his late 20s. He was charming and funny. I guess his appearance delayed my creeper sense, and I dismissed his behavior as being socially awkward. He continued to follow me and talk to me, and I tried to drop subtle hints that I had a boyfriend, although I didn't. Towards the end of my shift, he became a little more aggressive. He told me, "Well, I guess I'll just have to kill him," referring to the boyfriend I spoke about. He said it with a laugh, and then told me he would walk me to my car when my shift was over. He then left to check on his mother. At this point, I was creeped out. It was the end of my shift, and we gave report to the day shift assistants. I told my co-worker what had happened with the son, so she checked the hallway before we left, and we took a little-known path to the parking garage. I went to bed when I got home, and around noon the day shift nurse called me. She told me not to come in. She said the son had been asking about me. He asked when I worked, what my real name was. I put a nickname on my badge, and more personal info. When she wouldn't tell him, he asked other nurses. His mom was going home that day, she said, so I could probably come back tomorrow. Tomorrow came and my manager called. She told me to stay home the rest of the week. The son had sent flowers to the floor, and had called every floor asking about me and when I worked. She said she didn't feel like it was safe for me to come back. Eventually he quit calling, and I came back to work. About 3 months later, I was watching the news. He had been arrested for rape and murder. So, creepy son, let's not meet again. 2. I've been overweight for most of my adult life. I'm fine with it now, but back in college, I had a hard time accepting that I could never be skinny no matter how hard I worked at it. I didn't love my body then, and I rarely got attention, mostly because I had no sense of personal style and was very shy. But at the time, I was convinced it was because I was fat. My 3rd year of college, I decided I was sick of being in my dorm alone most nights, so I signed up for a dating site that rhymes with "okay stupid." I posted a couple of blurry-ish face pics, wrote what I thought was a pretty clever profile, and listed a few extra pounds as my body type, which was accurate at the time. I received a few messages, but one guy really stood out to me. He was nerdy, tall, average-looking, and had glasses. Seemed funny and interesting. We chatted for a few weeks before he finally asked me out. I was so nervous, but I agreed. Like I said, I wasn't very stylish at that point, and really didn't know how to highlight my assets. So I just wore some plain pants and a funny t-shirt that I thought he'd appreciate. We met at a shitty chain restaurant, and the moment he set eyes on me, I could tell he was not happy to see me. I kind of shrugged it off at first, thinking he was just nervous. But we sat down and it was silence. He only spoke to the waiter. He didn't even look at me. I tried to spark up conversation, but he sneered at me when I ordered some chicken dish. It came out on a bed of pasta, and the chicken pieces were arranged in an odd way, so I joked that it looked like a facehugger from Aliens, just to try to lighten the mood. Fat chicks and humor, right? He snapped. You think that's funny? I was kind of stunned. So we rushed through the rest of dinner not speaking, and I paid for my meal, and we walked out. Surprisingly, he walked me out to my car and stood creepily not saying anything as I got in. By now I was a bit spooked by his weirdo behavior, but I was feeling a bit terrible that the date had gone so poorly that I didn't pay any attention. It wasn't until I pulled into a gas station parking lot to get gas that I realized he pulled up behind me. I tried to play it off like I didn't notice him. He didn't get out of his car, so I hurried up and pumped my gas, then got back into my car and kept going. When I pulled into my dorm building parking lot, he pulled up right behind me, blocking me in. I got out of my car. By now it was about 9 p.m, so it wasn't too late and there were plenty of other people around. The dude walked right up to me and said, "If I ever see you anywhere in public again, I will slit your fat fucking throat." I was so shaken I couldn't even respond. He got back into his car, then drove away. I looked around and no one seemed to have noticed the encounter, and I was too scared to say anything. When I got back to my dorm, I looked up his account and reported it. Less than 5 hours later, his account was gone, and I never heard from him again. But nerdy McGlass's face, let's not meet again. 3. As usual, there's a little backstory here. When this happened, I was 20. I'm female, and I should also point out that I am short and am often confused for being a lot younger than I am. Even at 20, I was often mistaken for being 16. I was in Paris for the summer. I had organized to go on a walking tour, a ghosts and dark history tour, ironically. The tour didn't start until late at night. I'm always early to nearly everything, and this wasn't an exception. I had over an hour to wait, so I went for a walk along the Seine, and by the time I walked back to the meeting point, Pont Neuf, it was dark. Again, keeping myself busy until the tour started, I walked the bridge, admiring the many locks that adorn it. It was then that I noticed him. When I looked up, he was looking at me. Noticing that I had caught him staring, his gaze drops, and he shuffles along, seemingly doing the same thing as me, admiring the locks. 2 things immediately caught my attention. 1, he wasn't a tourist. He wore a very dirty vest with a workman's high visibility vest over the top. Its brightness factor lessened by the fact that it too was covered in dirt and grime stains. 2, I had noticed him hanging around over 15 minutes ago. Most people, mostly couples, continue walking the bridge. He was lingering. I ignored him, convinced it was nothing but a weirdo who was harmless. I sat down at one of the benches, taking in the lights of the city. It was less than a minute before he sat down beside me. He smelled awful. I had to look in the other direction. "Where are you from?" he asks. There was no way I'd give him any information about myself. My alarm bells were ringing. I say nothing and pretend to be overly interested in my phone, which did not work in France and was therefore only there for show. "I think you're alone," he says. "No," I tell him, "I'm waiting for someone." I turn back to my phone. "Have a coffee with me." The way he asks makes it sound like a demand, not a question. "No," I say again, "I'm waiting for someone." He falls silent. Not for long, however. "It's cold here." "Have a coffee with me," he says again. By this point, I'd had enough. I'm not a rude person, and I avoid conflict, but he was not going to be leaving anytime soon. "If you're so cold, why don't you go home?" I snap. He falls silent. It's at this point I reflect on what he's been saying and realize that he's been purposefully making mistakes while speaking English. Not the mistakes a Frenchman would say. I speak French and have many French friends. I know the mistakes they tend to make. This man was a native English speaker who was pretending not to be. I think that you are alone. Once again, I tell him that I'm not. He's staring at me intently. I don't think you're waiting for anyone. I get up, tell him that was exactly what I was doing, and leave. I walk a little ways, unsure what to do. He follows me. I keep walking, heading for the nearest couple over the other side of the bridge. I'm aware of him not far behind. I reach the couple, my heart jumping in my chest. Pouvez-vous rester avec moi? Il y a un homme qui me suit. Will you stay with me? There's a man following me. The French couple stare at me in surprise and agree, asking if I was okay. I look behind me to see where he was. He disappeared. To be gone that fast, he'd had to have ran. So, let's not meet again. 4. I was a very sheltered kid when I was growing up. My mom was your standard helicopter parent, but my father usually had a little more finesse about letting me think I had more freedom, even if he was still keeping an eye on me. More on that later. My mom worked a standard 9 to 5 at the time, but my father was self-employed, so he usually arranged his hours to be home when I got back from school. I asked for $5 so I could ride my bike 10 blocks down to the nearby convenience store and buy a snack. Something I enjoyed greatly because my father let me go by myself, so it was one of the few times I wasn't cooped up under the watchful eye of an adult. I was at that age where I was starting to want more freedom. My father received an urgent call from one of his clients and had to go meet with them. He gave me a quick speech about just going there and back and told me to call him once I was back home, but otherwise didn't seem too worried. We lived in a nice neighborhood, and I'd made this ride many times before already. Then he was off. It was a windy day as I was winding my way through the neighborhood. I was 2 blocks away from the store when a car rolled up perpendicular to me, out of one of the cul-de-sacs. Inside was a well-groomed man, maybe in his mid-30s. He was wearing a button-up shirt with a tie, and was generally white-collar looking. He rolled his window down and politely asked me how to get to the freeway. I wasn't good with directions, so I just pointed down the road and said, "Somewhere that way, if you keep going, you'll see it." While I said this, I noticed he had his hand on something odd, looking down, somewhere close to where the stick shift would be on a manual. I just assumed that's what it was, and brushed it aside. The man rolled his car closer until the passenger side was only a foot from me, and said, "Sorry, I didn't hear you over the wind." Starting to feel those instinctual spine tingles you get when something's wrong, but not wanting to be rude, I repeated myself. It was at this point I gasped and my whole body went numb. The odd thing his hand was wrapped around was not the stick shift. He was holding his penis and was completely naked from the waist down. Still polite, he asked, "Could you get in and show me the way?" I rolled my bike backwards, stammering breathlessly. "I can't," he replied. "That's okay," and calmly drove off. No screeching tires, no attempt at a quick getaway, and opposite the direction I pointed toward the freeway. Then he was gone. I sped to the store and waited in the back for a few minutes before calling my father, with their phone and explaining what happened. He booked it to the store and called the cops. The officer who responded said it was pointless to call without plate numbers, something I was too shocked to get at the time, or any other identifying information. He said the man was probably on the other side of town by now, trying the same thing on some other young girl. The especially weird part is, later that night, my father confessed to always following behind me a certain distance so that I wouldn't notice. This was the first time he didn't. Thankfully, over a decade later, nothing involving this man happened again. So, potential abductor and child molester, let's not meet. 5. I live in a pretty big Midwest city. about 35 minutes north of my hometown. I live in one of the stereotypical not-so-great areas of town, which is fine with me because it's cheap, and my neighbors are great. I live with my best friend and his husband. They're high-ranking Buddhist monks. Yes, really. So they travel a lot, which means I'm left alone in my house about 6 months of the year. For the past month or so, I've been experiencing some really strange shit. Not paranormal, but someone is fucking with me. A few weeks ago, 2 of my tires got slashed. Okay, fine, whatever. I have insurance and roadside assistance. A few days after that, my back window got smashed in. I drive a baby Kia Soul. And spray painted across the back was the word cunt. When I walked outside the next morning, I barely noticed it, but the street lamp made it pretty obvious. Needless to say, I was really upset. By the way, I honestly don't have any enemies. I have like maybe 5 or 6 friends that I hang out with on a weekly, bi-weekly basis. Other than that, I'm at work or home. So I went to work that day, smashed back window and all, and worked through the longest day of my life. I work 8 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. At about 1 p.m., I got a text from an unknown number with a bunch of laughing emojis. I didn't think anything of it because, that's 2016 life, Facebook, Tinder, etc. But I went home without any real worries that night, and had some wine because it was a super shitty day. It wasn't until about 8 p.m. that night that I started getting really scared. That same random number had been texting me sporadically throughout the day, but I didn't respond. However, once I was home, by myself, I got a text from the same number saying, "You look so pretty and relaxed. I hope you enjoy that book." I was having my 3rd glass of wine and reading a book at the time, so I was thoroughly terrified. I called my very best friend, ex-military and super crazy. He's been here a few days now, and I've still had a few creepy texts that only he replies to. It stopped for a day or so, but now we're sitting here in my bedroom, and we just heard someone knock on my door. It's 11:18 p.m. on a Tuesday. My friend went to go check. He has a gun. Yay, the Midwest. As soon as he left my room, someone knocked on my window a few times. I'm honestly not sure what to do now. My best friend can't stay here for weeks, and my other best friend won't be home for another 3 months. I hope I never meet this weird stalker person. Edit. I called the police on my way to work today. I'm going to talk to them this afternoon. Second edit. I went to the police station last night after work and gave them all the information. Since there's been damage to property and the possibility of this person being in or around my house, they said it's now an active investigation. I did try googling the number, but nothing came up because it's a cell phone. I'm not sure if those are public. And Facebook didn't turn up anything either. After reading through a lot of PMs and comments, I tried to dissect my life as much as possible to think of who this person could be. I've narrowed my list down to only one person. I gave their name to the police as well. Hopefully this ends soon because I'm ready to move on with my life and not be terrified of my own home. Thank you to everyone for all the kind words and great suggestions. I'll let you guys know if anything comes up. Third edit. After going through my life, like I said before, I think I've narrowed it down to someone that I had a short, no-commitment relationship with about 4.5 years ago. He tried contacting me about 6 or 7 months ago, but I wasn't interested in having him be a part of my life again. He not only knows where I live, but he knows where I used to live as well, my parents' house. Because he's my mom's next-door neighbor. The police haven't been a huge help. I'm not sure what to do now. If it is him, I'm not just scared for myself, but for my mom as well. 6. This incident happened to me when I was around 8 or 9, and I kind of forgot about it, perhaps suppressed it because it really freaked me out. To start, I live in a very safe, small suburb in California. Literally, the only crime that happens here is someone accidentally forgetting to pay for their coffee at 7-Eleven. Not even kidding. So, the night that this happened, everything was great. I had my 2 best friends over, who I'm still extremely close with. My sister and our 2 friends were going to have a sleepover, and my mom offered to walk us to 7-Eleven to grab some treats. 7-Eleven was about a 0.3-mile walk from my house, and it was something we did often. So around 8 p.m. we went walking to 7-Eleven, talking about Neopets and whatever other shit my 8-year-old friends and I talked about, while my mom and older sister listened to our nonsense. As we approached 7-Eleven, it was pretty empty except for a taxi driver sitting in his taxi. I didn't think anything of this at first. This is until I was walking into 7-Eleven, and I kind of felt like I was being watched. Midway through the door, I decided to turn around to confirm my suspicion, and yep, I was being stared at. But it wasn't a normal kind of stare. It was such a deep, intense stare, so focused like nothing could break it. He wasn't smiling either. I remember his hair was wild and curly, and his eyes were a little sunken in. He even looked freaky. He looked at me as if I was a target and nothing could break his eyes away. Peeved out, I scurried into 7-Eleven, trying not to focus on him. So as we're leaving 7-Eleven, I'm praying he's gone. He's not. As soon as I walk out the door, I immediately make eye contact with him, hoping he's not staring at me. But he still is. This time with more focus and a slightly creepy smile on his face. My friend's mom and sister are all talking amongst themselves and don't notice anything. We start walking away, thank God, and I put my head down. Now for the shit. Almost past his taxi, but right near his window where we're walking by, my eyes meet with his. I'm also a little behind everyone else. Suddenly, while staring at me, he puts his fingers in a V formation up to his mouth and licks them, obviously doing the pussy licking sign. But even creepier, I remember it being really slow, sensually licking both of his fingers up, down, all over again. And he's staring right at me. Frozen in fear, he then starts to smile at me while he did it. This lasted for about 5 seconds total while I was walking, but it felt like 20 minutes. Time just froze. Finally, I broke from his stare and placed myself in the middle of the group formation as we walked away. I kept staring back at the taxi as we walked away from the parking lot, petrified. Was he going to follow me home so he could see where I lived? Almost out of view, a man who was inside 7-Eleven got into his cab, and he left in the opposite direction from my house. I told my mom what happened on the walk home, while breaking down crying. No one saw any of this. She told me that I should have told her the moment so she could get his plate number and such. I also think she wanted to kick his ass because my mom is a bad bitch, and did some boxing during this time. I've never seen him again in my small town, and I beg to keep it this way. 7. When I was 16, my parents went on a week-long vacation. My brother had run of the house, but for some god-forsaken reason, I was left in the care of my mother's 3 sisters. Background on my aunts. They are crazy, self-absorbed, and very pushy. However, I will spare the mundane and cut straight to my night at Aunt Belle's house. Aunt Belle is a ditz, who cares only about herself, and that's about it. Her husband is okay, Uncle Ralph, but mostly they're insufferable. Family is family, though. I'm just going to cut to the situation because I tend to get a bit verbose. It was dinner time, and it was just me and Aunt Belle. Uncle Ralph came home with 2 of their golf friends in tow, along with a guy I will call Mr. Drunk, because I can't remember his name. He was about 6 sheets to the wind, and man could you tell. Unless you were one of the 4 adults, you could. Before dinner started, he was stumbling around the house, slurring his words. Most of the conversation was directed towards me, things like, "How do you know Belle and Ralph?" After I was introduced as their niece, "How old are you?" After it was mentioned I was 16, many times, "So, do you have a husband?" I did not, nor do I, have a husband. And many hugs with failed kisses. Yet no one noticed. And I sat next to this guy at the dinner table. Yay. Over dinner, Mr. Drunk decided to regale us by mentioning he was a real estate agent. Several times. How he had a sailboat, how he loved to go to wine country and stay in a huge house, etc. The adults were oblivious to how drunk he was, and kept pouring him more whiskey. All this time he would wink at me, grab my leg, and put his arm around my shoulder. Did I mention I was awkward as fuck? I was also anxious as fuck. I wanted to book it back home, so I pulled my aunt into the kitchen to express my feelings. Now, she was a bit of a wagon herself, and to boot, naturally shrill and stuff. "I don't see what the problem is, Hollywood. Just behave." I decided to dip and go up to my aunt and uncle's room and watch TV. I decided on a documentary on Elvis. Then, knocking on the door. Aunt Belle bursts in. She's drunk and pissed. "Hollywood, come say goodbye to our guests." So yeah, skipping to the point, Mr. Drunk pinched my ass as he left. I slept in my cousin's room, trying to figure out if I could just leave during the night without my neurotic aunt contacting the police. Skipped to 5:45 a.m. This is actually kind of funny, and I wanted to include it to lighten the mood. I grabbed my stuff and tiptoed down to my car. As I was getting in, Aunt Belle, wearing a pink bathrobe, runs out of the house, holding a pan of muffins. "Hollywood, where are you going? I made muffins. You get back inside now." Too late. Already had the keys in the ignition. As I speed down the street, I glanced in my rear view. Aunt Belle was still outside, screaming about the damn muffins. I did tell my parents when they got back, but they really didn't give a shit. That sucked. Years later, I learned the friends that came over with Mr. Drunk literally just met him at the golf course, so they didn't even know a lot about him either. I don't speak to Aunt Belle for multiple reasons anymore, but damn, she was, is, and always has been a ditz. 8. This is an open letter. I'd like to scream this all to the world, but you look so content and normal in all your recent pictures. You probably wouldn't remember me. You dated my older sister some years ago. She was 19 and had just entered the world of online dating. Her type was always the same. Older men who seemed loyal and clever to her, and boring and emotionally reticent to me. I was right about most of them. I was 15 and as inexperienced as a 15-year-old could possibly be. I hadn't had my first kiss or first date or first invitation to dance. I didn't know what my sexuality was. My sister was always much more certain about these things. She knew what she wanted and went after it. But cautiously. So, after your first couple dates together, she asked me to friend you on Facebook and decide whether I approved. I had read enough about psychology for people to trust my judgment. You were 30, and your daughter was 6. I remember thinking about how much closer I was to her age than yours. My sister bought her a tiara on her birthday. You had a house and an IT job, and a Facebook full of pictures of your cheerleader-type ex-girlfriend. My sister was insecure about those. I used to want to be a profiler. You were the best profiler I'd ever talked to. You knew my deepest insecurities after hardly a day of conversation. You could guess things I'd never said to anyone. You knew exactly what to say to keep me engaged despite what I was feeling. I was predictable back then, I suppose. You took my thoughts seriously, and it was amazing. We had such incredible discussions about the origins of life. Maybe this was why I figured you thought we were on the same mental level. But you were immature sometimes. There were ASCII dicks, of course. You asked for my phone number like I would be granting an unimaginable honor by sharing it. It worked. You then sent me a picture of a pepperoni pizza. I didn't open it for hours because you alluded to sending something else. And then expected my gratitude for not sending something naughty. You said your desires would send you to hell, though they were only thoughts for now. I can still picture the moment you sent that message. I was sitting on the kitchen counter, swinging my legs and waiting for my phone to charge so I could take it off the wall. It was after dinner, 8 p.m. on a February weeknight. I believe I had white jeans on. I definitely remember fuzzy blue slippers. They slipped off my feet as I ran upstairs in a panic to pray until the revulsion went away. It didn't. It took a few more things to make me finally cut you off for good. You told me what you imagined I'd be like in bed. Far from accurate, if you care. You asked for a cute picture with my stomach showing. At the time, I had no idea why I was so uncomfortable. It wasn't exactly sexual, and of course, it couldn't go that way, I thought. It took me years to realize I wasn't overreacting from inexperience. Thank you for the doubt. Go fuck yourself, and don't think of me during it. My sister's relationship with you never got serious enough to tell the rest of my family about. A couple months later, she broke up with you. She said you were beginning to creep her out. I agreed without elaboration. I'm sure you don't remember each other anymore. You probably don't remember me either. Thank goodness. You wouldn't like what I've grown into. You might have to wish I didn't remember you. So, for your sake, let's not meet. 9. I decided to share you this weird little story my mother has told me and my entire family one Christmas dinner. We were all discussing creepy stories when my mom brought up an experience that had happened to her and me when I was a toddler. I was intrigued with all these stories, and I asked my mom what happened. As she told me and the rest of my family this story, her voice began to lower with fear and worry. A while ago, my mom and dad lived in the ghetto side of Chicago. Despite it not being completely safe, it was home. During this time, I was born there, and when I was around 2 years old, my little sister was already on the way. My mom had to go to a local Target so she can get some items for me, as well as more stuff for my baby sister who is coming soon. She put me in the cart and began walking around the store. As she began walking, a few people complimented on how cute I was, and my mom would reply with a thank you. However, as she was getting items from a shelf, she heard me giggle and laugh, as if I was being entertained by something. She soon looked and noticed an old man who was playing peekaboo with me. It was a fair distance away, but my mom was still a bit on guard. She thought he was just messing with me since numerous people had already commented on me. She quickly left the aisle and began to get all of her stuff. As she was getting the rest of the items, she noticed the old man out of the corner of her eye, watching me hungrily. My mom knew that something was wrong, and she wrapped up her shopping for the day and quickly went to the checkout line. She sat me down and set the items on the counter. At one point, the cashier asked my mom, "Ma'am, do you know that man?" My mom quickly turned around and saw me walking towards the old man, who was cooing and luring me to him. My mom froze as she didn't know what to do. Other customers made the man stay in the store until the police came and arrested him. My mom gave her statement, and ever since that day, she's been keeping a close eye on me. After my other siblings were born, She was very cautious of us. Her worst fear was losing any of her children, especially her first child, who meant dear to her. I can tell it still unnerves her to this day, as she is still a bit overprotective of us. But I can tell she knows how mature I'm getting, as well as my sisters and brother. She never wanted to think about what would happen if the cashier didn't say anything, and frankly, I don't want to think about it either. 10. Let me preface this by saying I'm not really proud of how badly I handled this situation. I'm now 21, so this happened a good 7 years ago. For reference, I am a female, and I apologize in advance for the length. It was my freshman year of high school when I met Oscar. I had health with him, my first semester. He was your typical weird kid, hunched over his desk all the time, never talked to anyone, always had this shifty look on his face. I don't really remember how we started talking. Maybe our teacher changed our seats or something, but we did. I try not to be too judgmental when it comes to people. I mean, yeah, he was kind of weird, but what could happen? We started talking towards the ends of the semester, like sometime in November or December. He didn't strike me as any less odd as I got to know him more. If anything, he only seemed a bit weirder. But he was an okay kid overall. He would talk about how he should be on medications or else he'll hurt someone. He would speak in the third person. At the time, me being 14, I wasn't sure if he was being honest or if he was just trying to appear cool and mysterious, edgy or whatever. You know how dumb teenagers can be. He never made any threats to me or struck me as dangerous though. And we shared similar interests. He was smart too. So we had some pretty good conversations. I would say that we were friends. For a short time. The other guy in my story is my close friend, and still is, luckily, Eric. Eric and I had been close since we were 12. And since we didn't have any classes together, we would hang out by our lockers in the morning before first period. Oscar and Eric had lockers right by each other, which was just a coincidence. Once Oscar and I started talking, he would always follow us in the morning, try to get my attention like a needy puppy. It annoyed me a lot, because by this time, by now it was second semester and we were done with health, we also had an art class together at the end of the day. And since art was an independent type of class, he and I more or less had an hour to talk every day. So I guess my attention was more so on Eric during the mornings, because we barely saw each other and we were busy outside of school most of the time. I never really felt bad for that. Another thing that bothered me about Oscar is that he always reeked of BO. Not just by the end of the day and after he had gym class, but first thing in the mornings too. I'm not saying he was a bad person because of that, but it was something that bothered me because I have an unfortunately strong sense of smell. Second semester is when the shift in Oscar happened. I was already aware that he was very clingy in the mornings, but he started getting weird in my art class too. Conversations kept turning sexual a lot of the time. And I am not a shy person by any means, but the way he broached the subject of sex, and more specifically, my body, made me feel cringy. He really liked to bring up my genital regions a lot in conversation. He liked to touch me a lot too. I remember one day, I had just shaved so my legs were smooth, and he kept trying to touch my calf. It was a full-on rubbing though. I think I just tried to act casual and laugh it off. He once told me that while he was at a friend's house, he masturbated into her bra while she was downstairs making tea. I didn't even know how to react to that story. I think I changed the subject. He also had this extremely weird habit of following me around the room. Got up to throw something in the trash can that's 5 feet away. I turned around and there he was, I had to get up to get some supplies. Oh look, apparently he needed some too. It was a little unsettling. Can you not handle sitting alone at a table for less than 30 seconds? The way he'd walk through the halls was a little creepy too. He didn't really walk. He would almost dart and sidestep through the crowd, like he was gliding. Not quite smiling man creepy, but it was still strange. It wasn't like that all the time though. Almost every day he'd bring me a soda from the vending machine. The seal was never broken, so I wasn't concerned about contamination. And we'd watch Invader Zim on his iPod. It was just a conflicting situation because when he wasn't being creepy, he was pretty fun to talk to. I also felt sorry for him because he really didn't have many friends at all. He and Eric only started talking a little because of me, so I more or less ignored the creepy aspects. Fast forward to the last couple of weeks of school before summer. I remember this day very clearly. I had English first period, and I had forgotten my book. After making the stupidly long trip from my class to my locker, I found a typed note that had been shoved through those slot things on my locker. I cannot for the life of me remember specifically what the note said, and I don't have it anymore because it was turned over. I think the gist of it was, people aren't who they seem. But I remember the last line, which was, "Beware the man with the green eyes." I immediately knew it was Oscar because I had very recently commented on how his eyes were unique for his race. He's a mix of Mexican Asian, so the fact that he had green eyes was cool to me. I wasn't really sure how to deal with this weird-ass situation. The letter was not threatening, it was just plain bizarre. Part of me wondered if Oscar really did have something severely wrong with him, and this was his way of trying to warn me. I really had no idea, and I didn't know what to do. So later that day in art, I played this stupid, "Hey Oscar, I got this really weird note," mostly to see his reaction. He feigned ignorance, and tried playing the whole thing up like it was this big mystery. I don't know why I didn't confront him right then and there. I would have felt really awkward. How do you bring something like that up in casual conversation? Not to mention summer was literally 2 weeks away, so I really didn't feel the need to make a big deal out of it. Then more notes started coming. They started getting threatening. This is the best way to describe it, but the notes read like they were being written by a girl who had feelings for Oscar and was jealous of me, and threatened me to stay away or I would be hurt. Again, I didn't have the best judgment as a teen, so I didn't do anything. The whole thing was creepy, but in my mind, if I went and told somebody, I was just being a drama queen. I wasn't really sure what I was supposed to have done. 2 of my friends who lived out of state urged me to go to my dean. When Eric started getting notes, that made up my mind as to what I needed to do. I'm pretty sure they more or less said to stay away from me or he would be hurt. I know for a fact Oscar targeted Eric out of jealousy, and that infuriated me. Harass me, I don't really care. But don't you dare threaten the people I care about. My memory is a bit poo-poo, but I think the first note he got was more bizarre than threatening, and then the second note he received was. I think he got the second note the day after the first. The day Eric got the threatening note, we agreed to go to our dean's the following morning. I think he must have gotten it when school ended, and that's why we decided to go the next morning. He and I both knew they were from Oscar. We just weren't sure what to do until they started getting bad. It's not like either of us had ever had anything like this happen before. Meanwhile, Oscar claimed to have known the girl who was writing the notes, and he was making up some elaborate plot of how they met up near his house, and she was wearing a mask, and she was scorned by her rejection. It was so ridiculous that I didn't really bother to try and remember the details. So that fateful morning, Eric and I met up, and we quietly started heading towards the dean's office. Oscar was, unsurprisingly, following us as usual, and started aggressively questioning us where we were headed. I just kind of turned to him and told him that Eric and I were going to turn in all of our notes because things were starting to get out of hand. He completely started to panic and started to stutter. Eric and I quickly just kept along as Oscar kept trying to plead with us not to go to the dean. And then he blurted out, "It was me, okay? I did it. Because I love you." Eric and I both kind of stopped, just sitting in a shocked, uncomfortable silence until I finally said, "Well, even if that's the case, we're still going to the dean. This isn't okay." And we started walking again, with Oscar following us and begging us not to say anything. The hallway that the dean's office is in is really narrow, and the door is completely wooden with a tiny window toward the top. Eric headed in before me, and didn't see when Oscar grabbed my arm telling me not to say anything. It actually kind of hurt, and I told him to let go, upset, while yanking my arm back. He gave me this look of pure hatred and snarled, "You bitch," and literally tore off down the hallway. This all probably took place in less than 30 seconds, but it felt longer. I was pretty shaken after that, and I hurried after Eric. We sat down and told the dean everything, gave him all the notes, and told him who we thought had written them. He was kind of a jerk about it, asking why we waited to turn the notes in, and our answer was more or less they were only weird to start with, not threatening. After he had one of the office women call for Oscar, we sat in silence until Oscar came in the office. He came in head low, and singing under his breath, "Looks like I'm in trouble again." It was probably the most uncomfortable thing I've ever had to sit through, as the dean asked Oscar why he did what he did, and Oscar mumbling, "I did it because of her," and gestured to me. The dean could probably sense that I wanted to disappear on the spot, and he questioned Oscar alone after that. Eric and I were asked to fill out reports of what happened. I think one of the things that angers me the most to this day is when one of the female security officers tried to downplay Oscar's behavior. "Oh, he's just a young boy, and he's just confused, etc." I don't freaking care. He's 14. That didn't excuse him grabbing my arm and calling me a bitch, or sending weird notes and threatening my friend out of jealousy. He probably has a mental illness of sorts, yes, but that doesn't excuse what he did. The fact he probably had a problem and was not on any sort of medication or getting any counselling makes it even worse. He was suspended until summer, and he had to go to court. I didn't press charges, but because it happened on school property, they couldn't just ignore it. I got a few court letters updating me on what was going on. I still saw him after that, my senior year. I had 2 classes with him, and he was exactly the same, even physically. He was still short, and he wore the same clothes. Luckily, I have not seen him since. Eric says that he's seen Oscar before on our college campus, but I have yet to run into him. I doubt we'll ever cross paths again, but I hope not. More proof that I need to move to Maine. 11. Well, first of all, this all happened when I was in 9th grade. I had matured early, so I received a lot of gross comments in 7th to 9th grade. This made me lose confidence in myself. So instead of being very sociable and outgoing like I used to be, I was shy and awkward. I had 0 friends. Literally 0. So teachers often came up to me and asked me if I was lonely, and just showed interest in me because I seemed depressed or whatever. My English teacher's name was Mr. Z. He had the creepiest blue eyes, and his smile was even creepier. On the first day of school, he asked us all about ourselves, what our favorite subject was, our names. but he always called on me, even though I never raised my hand. When he asked me, I would speak quietly because everyone stared at me, and it made him laugh. He used to call me Goodheart. Towards the middle of the year, I noticed that he showed me a lot of favoritism. If he took away our privileges to go to the bathroom, he would say something like, "Take this to the office," and then whisper, "Go to the restroom if you have to." When we received our progress reports, I would have A's on assignments I had never done. I never told anyone about this because English was a class I had to pass in order to graduate. As the school year went on, I started to realize that he never looked me in the eyes. He would stare at my chest, then my legs, at the floor, etc. But when he did look at me, he barely blinked, which made me look away instead. It was very awkward. When I first noticed him blatantly staring at my chest, I didn't think much of it at the time because I'm not very blessed in the chest, so guys usually look at my butt instead. I just figured there was something on my shirt. The first few times. Towards the end of the year, he started asking me to come to his room during lunch so I could help him grade. When I came to his room, he'd have a movie on, and we'd watch that for my lunch. He didn't have to teach a class after, so he let me skip my class afterwards. One thing I noticed right away was that there was sex scenes in every movie we watched. He'd ask me if I wanted to skip, and I'd shrug because I wanted to act mature. It started to happen every day. We'd watch a movie every day, which all had very awkward sex scenes. At the end of the school year, we watched our last movie, and this time the scene was very long, and very detailed, and very awkward. He put his hand on my leg and laughed. "It'll be over soon." He kept his hand on my leg for the whole thing. Luckily, when the bell rang, I left. I didn't say bye, I just left. The reason why I wrote this is because I saw him at Petco, my job, a week ago. I didn't think he'd recognize me. I wear glasses now, dyed my hair blonde, and lost a little weight. I was helping one line of people which had about 5 people in it, and my co-worker was working with a line that had 2. He stood on my line and waited for everyone to finish even though the other line was empty. When I took his things, avoiding eye contact the whole time, he stared at me. I didn't look up because I didn't want to meet his gaze. Towards the end of the transaction, he started asking me about my life. Did I like my job? How was my family doing, etc. I just gave him short, simple answers, while he drilled a hole into my face with his eyes. After we finished, he smiled and said, "I'll be back again, Goodheart." After freshman year, he was no longer a teacher at my school. I never found out why. 12. My fiancé and 2 friends dropped acid for the first time. I was completely sober, but they all wanted to go for a walk. It's 1 a.m. But I was having fun watching them trip, so I was down. I just suggested we bring our one dog, since it was nighttime. My dog is a scary, big breed. We have a bike path that is surrounded by trees and bushes, so we decided to walk down that, and we're just going to go to a big hill and chill. We noticed there was a house party going on in one of the backyards. 2 of my buddies wanted to go join the party, but we convinced them to stay. So we're just sitting on the hill, joking around. We heard this weird cooing noise. We were all just laughing and thinking it was some high school kids and continued having fun. The cooing continued for 5 minutes, and we were starting to get weirded out, and then we realized they were up in the trees. At this point, my fiancé and one friend were at the bottom of the hill. They started walking up, and me and my other friend noticed a guy jump down from one of the trees. Then 2 guys jumped down. Then we noticed guys coming out of the bushes beside us and coming up the hill, starting to surround us. My friend who was with me grew some crazy balls and starts walking towards them, being like, What the fuck are you doing? Back the fuck up. My fiancé and the second friend also start walking toward them. And some huge guy who does not look like he's from this area at all just steps out and steps to them like he's going to fight. My dog starts going apeshit. This is a dog who is a complete sucky love bug, whose submissive pees when someone comes over. His hackles are up, and he has the deepest, biggest bark I've ever heard come out of his mouth. We just see a bunch of dudes back right up, except the huge guy. My friend is still trying to be tough at this point, and is saying, Back the fuck up or we'll let the dog go. The huge guy says, What the fuck is your dog going to do? And steps toward them again. At this point, my fiancé is like, okay, this dude is fucked, and this is a bad situation. If anyone swung, all the guys surrounding us would have jumped in. My fiancé is telling my two friends that we all need to go now and trying to get them back up the hill. I think everyone all of a sudden lost their high, and we just walked away. That situation could have been so fucked. They were in the trees before we got there, otherwise we would have seen and heard them. So it's like it was planned and they were waiting for some kids to just come up that hill drunk to jump them. If we didn't have the dog with us 100%, we would have been jumped. It's just because all the big guy's friends backed up when they saw and heard the dog. Who the hell sits in trees and coos at people and surrounds them without having bad intentions? I think if my friend didn't try to act tough the minute we turned to walk away, they would have snuck up behind us and jumped us. It seemed very planned. Hands down, the creepiest, most fucked up thing I've ever experienced. 13. A little background information before I get started. This happened to me in my junior year of high school. I lived about 5 minutes walking distance from my school. My dad left for work every day around 5, and I didn't have a car, so I walked to and from school every day. Most of my neighbors were fairly nice, and if they were outside while I was walking, they would usually say hi or something of that nature. I had lived in this neighborhood for years, so I knew almost everyone. Every day on my way to and from school, I would pass this really good-looking guy sitting outside his house, usually smoking a cigarette. He would say hi and finish smoking as I walked towards my house. Nothing unusual. After a while, he built up the nerve to talk to me. He was really cute, and me being an awkward teen girl, I was thrilled by this. He would make small talk with me, nothing weird at first. This went on for about a week. After a while, I noticed he would be outside his house every day in the morning and after school, like clockwork. This made me feel uneasy. He would start talking to me every day after school, asking if I was single, if I wanted to get coffee, and if he could have my phone number. I came up with excuses every time. Then he started asking me to come inside. This was a red flag. He was fairly older than me, maybe 23, and I started to notice that he shook, like a lot, and his hair was starting to fall out. This made me feel even more uncomfortable. Somehow he got my phone number and would text me excessively, always asking me to date him and come to his house. He actually came to my house one day and asked my dad if he could date me. My neighborhood knew my dad very well. They knew not to mess with him or me, so my dad told him to stay away from me. That worked for a while. Until one day my dad went to his house to help his mother with something, and he told my dad how much he enjoyed watching porn and thinking about me, and how he wished he could date me. My dad pretty much told him to never come near me or my house again, or he would regret it. Well, about a month later, during the summer, I was hanging out with a group of friends when we went outside to see cop cars outside Creeper's house. Cop cars in our neighborhood weren't too unusual, so we shrugged off and continued to hang out. After about an hour, we go back outside to see more cop cars and a helicopter circling. By this time, we were more than curious, so we stuck around outside to see what happens. After a few minutes, a K9 unit shows up, followed by a SWAT vehicle. They surround the house, and after a good hour, they pull Creeper outside of the house and into a cop car. Come to find out, he locked his mother out of the house and barricaded all entrances. When the cops tried to get him out, he told them he had guns and lots of them. I found out later that he's a drug addict and a schizophrenic. So, creepy cute neighbor, let's not meet again. 14. I've considered sharing this story for a while now, and finally feel like maybe I should. While it's not the most horrendous story in any way, it affected me and still makes me shiver to think about it. About 5 years ago, I moved to Ottawa to go to school. I was 18 and on my own for the first time. I should mention that I've always been very cautious around strangers. I never make eye contact on the street. I never ask for directions or make it known that I'm lost. And I walk with purpose. I always trust my gut and do what I can to keep myself safe. I even ran home crying once when I was about 7 because there was a man looking at me at an intersection, and he wasn't crossing even though there were no cars around. So this happened in March. If you know anything about Canada, you know that around March there is usually a few days of warmth where we think it might be spring, and then we get another snowstorm or two before May. It was a Monday afternoon, and I had no classes that day. I decided to walk down to the grocery store and pick up some food for the week. It was a beautiful day, around 15 degrees, which is fantastic for March. So I decided to wear just a plain t-shirt with a slight v-neck. I was walking down the street enjoying the sun. On one side of the street is a shabby mission shelter, and any girl in the area knows that you don't walk on that side unless you want to be leered at and catcalled. So I'm walking down the hill towards the grocery store, and I notice a man about 200 meters away walking in the same direction as me. He glanced over his shoulder, turned around, and just stopped where he was. Now, being the paranoid girl I am, I got a gut feeling that I couldn't ignore. I could tell he was waiting there for me. I only had 3 options. I could cross the street and face the certain harassment walking by the shelter. I could turn around, offend him, and risk him following me, or I could keep walking and avoid all eye contact, hoping he gets the message. Cringing, I decided to keep on walking. At least I'd still get my groceries, and maybe nothing was going to happen. I was probably just being paranoid. I got to the next stop sign, and now he's standing about 50 meters from me. At this point, he starts walking toward me. And oh God, he was doing this awful strut and leering at me. And all I could think about was some terrible 70s porn. The image of him walking intently towards me is burned in my mind to this day. Committed to just getting it over with, I continued walking toward my destination. As he continued towards me, I stuck to the very edge of the sidewalk, giving him a wide space to walk by, but he stayed toward the edge as well. As I went to pass him, he stuck his hand out and touched my arm. What he said will never leave my mind. Girls are out to play today. Then he licked his lips and asked me if I wanted some company. At this point, I felt like I was going to throw up, and I just walked as quickly as I could to the grocery store, called my boyfriend and told him I needed him to leave work and come get me. Now, I know this doesn't seem so terrible, but I felt absolutely sickened by it. Mostly because I really wasn't wearing anything revealing. The girls were not out to play at all. It was the first warm day since fall, and I was enjoying the sunshine. He made me feel ashamed for just wearing a t-shirt. It was also deeply disturbing because he actually reached out and touched me. Guys, I don't care what the situation is, it is never okay to touch a girl uninvited. So creepy guy on the streets of Ottawa. Please, let's not meet. 15. The story starts in the summer circa 1990 in a Dallas suburb. As a child, and still today, I was very whimsical and didn't pay much attention to anything that didn't concern me in the moment. It was a summer day, and I was playing in the backyard. My mom had to run some errands, so of course, I stalled and waited till she was walking out of the front door, until I finally dragged ass to join her. "Did you shut the sliding door?" she asked. Not remembering or caring at all, I said yes, and about our day we went. We arrived back home sometime early evening around 6. As we enter the house, the sliding door is wide open. Of course, my mom scolds me, and me, truly not remembering, apologize and go about my business. As the night winds down, my mom tucks me in and goes downstairs to run a bath. So, like any 5-year-old, the last thing I do is go to sleep. As I lay in my bed playing with micro machines and making goofy kid noises, I feel my bed move slightly. I immediately pause to look around. I quickly dismiss it and go about my usual kid business. A few minutes later, the end of my bed lifts up and slams back down. Of course, I did what any 5-year-old would do and screamed like a fucking banshee. Then, in the dark room, my bed starts moving and a shadow slowly tries to rise from the foot of my bed. I stood up and Olympic jumped all the way to the door and meet my mom mid-stairs. As I hysterically tell my mom what happened, we run to the kitchen and quietly call 911. We kept it short and ran to the car and waited outside for the police. As we wait, we see my upstairs light turn on, then the hallway, then the stairway. After a minute, the police came screeching in. They flew in the house and searched it to no avail. The cops said we probably walked in as the intruder was trying to rob the place, although nothing was touched or disturbed. Needless to say, I didn't sleep in my room for a month, and now every time I get home at night, I always turn on every light and check every crevice. Thanks a lot, creepy burglar. I hope we do not meet again, because I would beat the shit out of you. 16. So this happened a while back when I was in my early 20s. I was working at a little retail store in my town's mall. It was coming up to the end half of the day, and I don't know how I noticed it, but an older man, probably 50s, I'm not sure, had walked past my store about 3 to 4 times, not consecutively, just every now and again. Now I worked in one of those little costume jewelry stores, so it was odd for an older male to be walking past so many times. But I kinda didn't think anything of it. I don't even know how I picked up on it in the first place. It came closing time, and I had left to catch my bus at about 6:30 p.m. I remember it was transitioning into winter, because it was dark out by then. I am a very paranoid person. I still live by the stranger danger rules. So even now, when I leave work, I make sure to change into an outfit less fashionable. I don't like drawing attention to myself in any way possible, so I try to make sure I'm as covered up and average looking as I can be. I don't know why, but I have that disease where I attract all the wrong attention for no reason at all. So as I said, I was waiting for my bus home, sitting by myself at the town centre's bus terminal. And guess who walks past? The older man. At this point, I kind of felt a little uneasy, but in my head I tried to make reason prevail, as many people take buses all the damn time. My bus showed up and I got on, and well, you can all guess who got on after me. I remember sitting in the seats facing inward, the ones for wheelchairs and prams, and he sat at the first seat above the steps. I remember staring forward and feeling his eyes burning into me. I kept trying to use my peripheral vision to see if he was looking at me, but not wanting him to know I noticed him. The whole bus ride I waited to see if he got off before my stop, thinking it was just my over-anxious paranoid mind working overtime. Until I pressed a button for my stop. I waited until the last possible second to press it. As I stood up, he did too. I went to walk to the front door of the bus, and he exited the rear. At that moment, as soon as he stepped off, I sat back down again. I had no idea where the bus went after my stop, but honestly, I didn't fucking care. I will never forget the look on his face as the bus drove off. I've never seen such hate and anger in someone's face than I did through that window. His face is burnt into my memory like a photograph. It still absolutely terrifies me to this day. I have no idea what would have happened to me if I got off the bus at my stop that night, but I'm glad my paranoia was so intense, I didn't. 17. I am a youngish girl living in Southern California, along the coast, and every day I usually take my 2 kids for a 3-mile walk along the beach and back, sometimes making a detour to get coffee. This was a moderately windy day, and my dress was kind of fluttering all around, so about a mile into our walk we decided to take a right and cross back to head a couple blocks inland to grab an iced coffee. As I'm walking across the street with my kids, both toddlers, one in a stroller and one walking, an older lady comes from behind me and says, "Don't look right now, just keep crossing the street. But I want you to know there is a man following you, taking photographs of you, and has been for at least half a mile along, enter street name here. He's been driving about 2 miles per hour behind you as you walk." At first I thought it must be some kind of mistake, or that maybe the lady was crazy or something. There's plenty of young girls who jog up and down my street in sports bras and underwear, basically. So why would anyone bother following me, a mom with 2 kids, on a stroll in broad daylight? We cross and continue walking for a second up the street, and I can't help but look and try to see if this lady is losing her mind or if she's right, and sure enough, a middle-aged, bald man in a tiny little black smart car has now turned the same corner as us and is driving, like she said, about 2 miles per hour behind me, with a telescopic lens, the kind you see at sporting events, etc., pointed directly at me and my kids. Instant adrenaline rush. I looked him dead in the eyes, and he moved the camera so I could see his face and looked right at me. Then moved his head behind the small piece of frame that holds the window, so his face was hidden, and continues to point the camera directly at me, presumably taking photos of me, or even worse, my small children. I wanted to take a picture of his car, but this is the one day I left my phone at home to charge. I rush the kids into the small coffee shop on the corner, and the lady tells me to go inside and call someone for help, while she waits and makes sure he is gone when we leave. I immediately called my husband on the coffee shop's phone and started crying. Not sure why I was so flushed with emotions, but all I can say is I felt so violated and scared as heck that someone wanted to hurt my kids or me. He was stuck at work, 20 miles away, so I kept trying other friends to come help me. Trying to remember people's numbers when you need them is so hard in this day and age with everything one click away. That lady, who I'm so grateful for, waited 15 minutes outside the shop while the guy just sat in his car waiting for me to leave. She stared right at him, and he didn't move for all that time. That part really freaks me out because it was obvious that he knew we knew he was there waiting, but he was so brazen that he didn't even care. After the 15-minute period, he did leave, and I was able to get a hold of my dad to come pick us up and drive us around for a while, in case he was somehow following us, and would see where I lived, which was just 2 blocks south. 2 lessons learned that day. I don't ever leave the house with my kids without a charged phone, and I'm so much more aware of my surroundings now. To think he followed me for that long and I didn't notice. And it took so long for anyone to tell me. I felt so dumb. So creepy guy in the smart car following me and my kids, taking photos of us. Let's not meet ever again. 18. It was about November 2012 in Houston, Texas. I was taking night classes to become a medical assistant. Trade school. Only 8 months of school, Monday to Thursday nights, 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. I was driving a Volkswagen Passat. Kinda girly, I know. I had just left school at about 10:15. Had some homework I had questions over, blah blah blah. Had to stop at Walgreens for an RX. There's really only one 24-hour Walgreens near my home, and it's right down the street from my school. I'm wearing royal blue scrubs, my student ID, and I'm tired. Getting my RX in the back of the store, I'm not really paying attention to my surroundings. But then, someone caught my eye. It was this guy. He kind of stood at the end of each aisle I was on, but I thought he was there doing the same thing I was. Anyway, I head up to the register because I had a few other items I had gotten, not just the RX, and I realize this guy has walked right past me and is standing outside near the trash cans at the entrance. As I'm walking to my car, I can see him pick up his phone and he is watching me. Hardcore. I can kind of read lips, and he was describing my appearance, car, build, all that to someone on the phone. So I get in my car, start it, he does the same. Now, it's worth noting, this Walgreens is 2 blocks away from the courthouse and the sheriff's office. I drive straight there once I get my shit together in my car. This guy followed me in his vehicle before realizing where I'm really going. The courthouse sheriff's is kind of in a crappy neighborhood, or at least on the edge of it. I park, run inside, as to speak with an on-duty officer, explain what had happened and what was happening. He takes a statement from me. I describe the man in almost perfect detail, and he offers me an escort home. We drive home, him a few cars' length behind me, and I make it there with no hiccups or no reappearance of the guy and the shitty Toyota Corolla. I park in my driveway. He circles around my cul-de-sac, and when he gets back to my house, calls me over to the patrol car. He has his laptop up, with this guy's mugshot and record right there. Asks, "Is this him?" I nod, yeah. What he told me next still freaks me the absolute fuck out. As we were driving to my house, the other sheriffs in the area found him, pulled him over, searched the car, and found a young gal, about my age, 19 at the time, in his trunk. He was known in the area for pimping, and was trying to get me as a possible prostitute of his. I'm not going to go into too many details because, duh, but at the time, I lived in a very well-to-do suburb of Houston. This kind of thing does not happen there. Or I should say, the news does not report it there. So, creepy-ass pimp dude, let's not ever meet. Well, you're probably in prison now, still. So. 19. As you might guess, I, as a private investigator, enjoy strange and even creepy oddities. I spend a lot of my leisure time indulging in reading and listening to various horror stories and podcasts. The few I heard recently were from the point of view of a private investigator. This inspired me, if you will, to share some of my experiences as a PI. This will be a several-part series covering all the weird shit I've dealt with in my profession. Albeit, some of it may seem mundane and not at all horrific. However, they are creepy nonetheless, given the context of the situation. The first story is at least frightening, however. It still gives me chills, especially due to my over-analytic nature, which I will say is required in this field. Anyways, this event took place on a warm, still night in August. My consultancy is located in a small town with a population of roughly 500 or so in southern Washington state. The town is surrounded with flourishing forests, not to mention the beautiful Gifford-Pinchot National Forest to the west, along with the grand view of Mount St. Helens. We get an occasional flow of tourists looking for a quaint place to stay, but other than that, we are a quiet town. I will spare all of you the details and features and move on to the story. However, I will be happy to answer any questions. As I recently said, the event took place on a still warm August night. It was stiffeningly humid out, for it has just rained the past several days periodically. In my consultancy, which we will call the PIHQ, Private Investigator Headquarters, just for the hell of it, I was just doing some surfing on the web, something I often do to pass the time. As I mentioned before, the town and the nearby proximity was pretty desolate. There would be large gaps of time between cases. As I recall, it was around 11 PM or so when I hear the phone ring. I have never established a closing time or do not call period because I was always licking my choppers for a good case. I flung out of my slouch on the chair and rushed to pick up the phone and greet the caller. On the other end, I hear heavy breathing. It was calm and controlled, in no way hyperventilating. So I figured it was just a heavy-set guy. I waited a few seconds for a response, however, none came. I reminded the caller who I was and if they had the right person. No response. I was about to hang up, and that's when I hear the shrill voice of a woman on the other end. Clearly not the caller's, but another voice in their surrounding environment. The shrill voice murmured something along the lines of, "Dave, the police turned up nothing. We lost him, Dave. We lost him." I began to listen intently, not wanting to disturb the conversation. "Dave, put the phone down, dear. Put the phone down." After this, there was dead silence on the other end. After a few seconds, I hear muffled sounds of the phone being set down on some surface. "That's right, baby. Now come back to bed." I hear the phone being picked up once more. The shrill voice calmly and ominously says, "He's dead, Dave. Our son is dead. There's nothing you can do to change that. Come back to bed." The breathing of the caller picks up again. He quietly says to her, "You did it. I know you did it." He frantically breathes in the other end to me. "I want out. I want out. Save me from this psycho bitch." The phone hung up. I have no idea where this phone call came from, for I had no technology to trace calls. What creeps me out the most is the contrast of emotion between the two people. The shrill woman voice was so calm, quiet, and seemingly psychotic, while the man's voice was anxious and felt completely threatened for his life. I lost many nights' sleep over thinking what possibly happened to the son who passed away and the man himself who screamed for help from the shrill voice. Along with all this confusion and mystery, I'm also dumbfounded to why this man contacted my agency, which is pretty elusive to find, and not the police. As a PI, I could offer no immediate help to his situation. I would like to hear your guys' opinion on the matter. 20. It was 2004. I was 14 back then, and summer holiday just started after my freshman year at middle school ended. I guess middle school is equivalent for how we'll call it in my country. I met a lot of new kids. Some of them were living in metro area of my city, smaller towns, villages, etc. So there was one guy whose name was David. You probably know all those middle school crushes where you were too scared and too childish to even hold hands. We were just like that. So he called me like 1 week earlier and invited me to his village, asking to take my bike so we can ride through the forest. Lovely times when there was no Facebook and barely no broadband internet access, except for schools. So A week later, his father drove to pick me up, introduced himself to my mum, took my bike, and after 1 hour we were at his home. I really liked how the countryside looked like. I've never seen farm animals before, so everything seemed charming. His family was really nice. His mum gave us dinner, and I remembered we were watching some DVD movies, and then decided to go biking. So as we were riding our bikes through the forest, we noticed a green trailer, quite far away from the road. It was not a camping trailer. It was actually called the Barakowóz in Polish, and I doubt you can see it elsewhere outside Poland. Basically, it's something you can see on construction sites or when roads are set up. I guess construction workers put their belongings there while they're doing their stuff. Out of curiosity, we left our bikes nearby and decided to check what's inside this trailer. First thing I remember is this smell. It was awful. Sour and putrid. Really similar to the smell of vomiting. He pressed against the door and we saw a messy, dirty old couch. And a lot of slurs, swearings, and weird drawings on the wall above it. There was also an old, dirty cabinet where some food was left to rot. Tons of bottles and trash piles, and a lot of flies all over the place. So when he got inside, he suddenly turned around with a girlish squeak. I just took a peek, and I've seen some sort of case which was made simply of wooden planks and nails, full of dead animals that resembled cats. Some of them were beheaded. And I totally freaked out. Started screaming, and we ran out of this trailer to get our bikes. And now, something that traumatized me the most. We heard some sort of whistling from 2 different directions, like there were 2 people trying to communicate with each other, or they were giving some signs. It was scary because I felt like they knew we were at this place. We started running, and whistling was getting closer and closer. When we got to the main road, we were riding like crazy. All I remember was my heart beating so fast I could barely hear anything. We got to David's home and I totally burst into tears, begging his parents to call my mum to pick me up and take me home. So she did. And she also yelled at me after I told her what happened. Honestly, I don't know what the fuck those people were doing in this trailer. Maybe they were some forest hobos and they were just eating those animals, but I don't know. There was something scary and not right about that trailer. All those weird drawings and writings, and the fact that they were living with dead, rotting cats or whatever it was. And that they were chasing us and trying to communicate with themselves whistling, which scared me to death. I kind of feel unsettled when I hear the whistling at night. And I just turned 26. And yeah, that was my first date. 21. This was about 3 years ago. 3 friends and I were all looking to rent a nice, affordable home for us to live for the next couple of years. We are 23 at this time. While we could save up money. We meet the landlord over at the place. We check it out and are informed that a man also rents out the basement. The basement and main floor were created into 2 separate areas. There was also a garage and a shed that both were used by the man who rented out the basement. Or so we thought. We are well liked in our area, so we always had friends over and parties on the daily. Everything was going fine. A few weeks pass, and we start noticing strange things like doors being unlocked and things not where we left them. We still thought it was just one of the other roommates being forgetful. One night we have a bonfire, and we have a few people over and are staring at the shed. A friend asks what we have in there. I reply that I wasn't sure, and that it wasn't ours. But my friend insisted we check it out. 3 of us walk over and try opening the door. It wasn't locked, but it felt like there was pressure holding it shut. I started kicking it right by the knob, and sure enough, it gave out, and we got in. It smelled terrible, like drugs, shit, and urine, and we couldn't see anything because it was night, and very dark. We go back into the house, get a flashlight, and return to find a mattress with about 50 2-liter Mountain Dew bottles filled with piss by it, a computer with a monitor, and cords running through it. Then I see light seeping through a hole in the wall that shows our driveway, then noticed another one facing the fire pit. So we take the monitor and the hard drive and bring them to our house. We have a friend who is an amazing hacker that we had come over to see what was on the computer. We found pictures of us, pictures of my friend's girlfriend tanning in the yard, pictures of our cars in the driveway. He had porn with titles that made him seem like a pedophile. We don't know because we didn't want to watch. Whoever this guy was knew our every move and was very creepy. We called the landlord and started yelling at him, explaining the whole situation, and ended with me saying I was just going to move out. The next day, a man bikes up to the door asking for his computer back. He had half a hand and looked to be strung out on drugs. I assume meth by what we found in the shed. My friend started yelling at him and freaking out at him, and told him we hacked into his pictures and saw everything. Right when the guy realized we had saw the pictures of us and everything, he ran to his bike and rode off faster than we could figure out where he was going. I moved out 2 or 3 days later from the paranoia of this one-handed meth head coming back to do something crazy, and realizing that this crazy individual was going through our house and belongings while we were gone almost every day and always watching us. Never seen or heard about him again. And if you rent from a landlord, investigate what's on your property, because you never know what you might find. Meth head shed creep. Let's not meet again. 22. My boyfriend and I had moved from our hometown to attend university. And even though his brother lived in the city we moved to, we were basically by ourselves. Not even a week after moving out, we both had jobs, and mine was, luckily, 5 minutes from home. My job at the time was in a clothesline shop, and we had 2 technicians who would visit the customers for maintenance and stuff. The clients would always pay for the services straight to the technician, and they were supposed to give us the money once they were back in the shop. Well, after receiving a call from a client complaining about the price, I checked out and found out our technician, Paul, had charged a lot more than what he told us. Further investigation showed that he had skimmed a lot from many other clients. I did what I thought it was correct and told my boss. He didn't seem very shocked, but decided to come to our shop, he had 5 in different cities, and talk to Paul. They did talk, but Paul wasn't fired. That day in particular was very stressful because my boyfriend had had a labyrinthitis crisis and had to go to hospital. And also I had a test that evening. I was a total mess. Anyway, I went to the university, which can be pretty dark in a winter night, and did the test. When I checked my phone after leaving the building, I saw a voice message from a woman whom I didn't know, saying that she didn't like me, that I was a whistleblower, and that I should walk on the line if I wanted to stay out of trouble. At first I was kinda shocked and asked her who she was, and said that she had probably mistaken me for somebody else. She kept sending voice messages calling me horrible things. She said I was a filthy whore, that she would make me pay for what I was doing, and that she would set fire to my body. At that point, she hadn't said anything about me, so I assumed it was just trolling. However, I told her that I'd report her to the police if she didn't stop. And then, guys, she freaked out. She laughed. I get chills from just remembering, and said, "Go ahead. If you do that, I'll make sure to destroy you and your family as soon as I get out of jail." She also told me to watch out and never walk alone in the campus. I was walking alone in the campus at the moment she said that. And as I said, it was pretty dark. The bitch knew which university I went to. Well, many students go there, so I wasn't that scared. I told her she could never get me, but then she mentioned the place I worked. She said she would go to my workplace on Saturday. It was on a Friday, to teach me a lesson. She also mentioned my name and where I lived. Damn. I panicked. I searched her number on Facebook, and she was so stupid that there were personal pictures of her and her family there. But there were also a few pictures of her holding guns and many other things that led me to believe she was actually a thug. Me, an everyday normal student who didn't have any friends in this city, was being stalked by a crazy thug who decided to threaten me out of nowhere. I called my boyfriend's brother, and he said it was nothing relevant and even told me not to tell my boyfriend, because he was already going through a lot. I considered calling the police, but they wouldn't do anything, honestly. On the following day, I told my boss what happened after realizing that she could be related to Paul the technician. My boss didn't say anything besides calling me stupid for not reporting her to the police. I mean, I'm all alone here. Richard, my boyfriend's brother, made it very clear. And reporting her could lead to her actually doing something to me. I didn't go to work that day and resigned a week later. Paul was fired 6 months after I quit. For weeks, I'd walk in fear and look back to make sure no one was stalking me. Not knowing whether the woman would come for me or not took me hours and hours of sleep. A few days ago, I found out she's Paul's sister-in-law. Not surprised. By the way, his wife was married to a famous violent drug dealer here, so the chances that her sister was actually a thug are pretty high. WhatsApp stalker. Paul the technician. Let's never meet again. P.S. I told what happened to the other technician, who was close friends with him. And he somehow knew about it before I said anything. After I quit the job, he said to the girls who still worked there that it was just a matter of time until Paul actually did something to hurt me, and that I was fortunate to quit before he can make a move. Now I work in a much better place, surrounded by lawyers. 23. Now, as a child, I was very docile and trusting of adults. An important fact for this story is that I've always been told that because of certain men in my family, I have a lot of relatives I don't know. I was told this as soon as I could understand. I was about 5 or 6 at the time, and it was either a weekend or half-term. I was with my grandma and we were shopping in Tesco, which is a large British supermarket chain. Now, as I was my grandma's only grandchild, she was naturally paranoid about keeping me safe. We had a system that I was allowed to be anywhere in the aisle that my grandma was in, but the second grandma went to another aisle, I had to follow. I actually tested that once and got a smacked bottom for not obeying, but that's another story. On this fateful day, Grandma and I were on opposite ends of the same aisle, and it was kind of busy, so we lost track of each other. I saw a seemingly friendly lady, old enough to be my mum, looking at me and smiling. Being the sort of child I was, I smiled back. Big mistake number 1. I noticed that the lady was walking at my exact pace. Whenever I moved to the same aisle that my grandma was in, the lady would get there with me. I also noticed that she had an empty basket, and there was a man that was always following me and the lady. I looked at him and my tummy hurt. I had no idea why I felt like that about him, and I thought I should tell my grandma, but I didn't. Big mistake number 2. The lady noticed my reaction to the man and smiled at me and waved, so I waved back. At this point, I realized that somehow I lost my grandma and began to cry. The lady came to me and told me to stop because she was my Auntie Kemi and I'd be okay. I believed her because I was told that I had relatives everywhere that I didn't know. She said that she could see my grandma at the exit, and she would take me to her. At this point, she was holding my hand, and I felt scared of her because she was a stranger. In a split second, my grandma comes bounding over and puts herself between me and the lady. The look of terror in my so-called Auntie Kemi's face was palpable. My grandma said these words, "Come near my grandchild again and I'll kill you myself. Nothing good has ever come of your family." What was so frightening is that Grandma was so angry that she wasn't even shouting. She said what she said, just above a whisper. After that, Grandma took me home and we baked cupcakes, and she told me to never trust another adult unless she personally told me that I could. And she said it wasn't my fault, and we weren't to speak of it again. Fast forward to me being 16, which was 4 years ago. My grandma tells me that I did have an auntie called Kemi, but she died in a car accident 10 years before I was born. This woman was impersonating my deceased aunt to get to my family over an age-old land dispute in our home country in the Caribbean. The land belonged to my grandfather, and a large portion was in my name. The last thing that I heard about this woman is that she was sectioned for doing an unrelated thing that I have no idea about. So bottom line is that this woman is actually, supposedly, one of my grandfather's children, with one of his mistresses. 24. For a quick bit of backstory, I'm 25, female, and a commuter. I live about an hour away from where I work, and I drive an old car that I'm replacing soon. A few weeks ago, I had a bad cold. I'd even lost my voice, so I decided to stop by a clinic after I clocked out. By the time I got out, it was dark. The good thing about that is that the area of the city I work in is fucking abandoned after dark, so I knew it wouldn't take me quite as long to get home as it usually does. I sometimes hung around the area until after dark for this exact reason. I got stuck at a punishment light near my job that takes about 5 minutes to turn green if you don't make it. I pulled up just as the light turned red and cursed quietly to myself. I barely noticed the guy who pulled up beside me at first, but a few seconds after he did, I felt that hackle-raising primal unease that comes when you feel someone staring at you. I looked. A large, beaten-up white van that looked like it belonged in a try-hard horror film had pulled up beside my car. And the driver was an older man. He was smiling at me. His smile was like a combination of Freaky Fred and the Cheshire Cat, but with less teeth. There was something horribly unnatural about it. I didn't know what to do. I smiled back, softly, trying to reduce some of the tension. Sure, he was just being friendly. He started waving rapidly and shouted something that I think was, "You're beautiful," but I'm honestly unsure. I was a little wigged out. I smiled again and stared back at the road, hoping he would stop. But I kept feeling his smile. I figured once the light turned green, I would lose him. So when it finally did, I took off as quickly as my old, chuggy car would take me. A few seconds later, I noticed I was being tailgated because headlights filled my car. They were flashing. I looked back and the guy was behind me. I wondered if I was dragging something or had a flat tire, and he was trying to be nice. But I realized quickly that wasn't it when I saw him getting even closer. I saw the look in his eyes in my rearview mirror. That smile. He was laughing by then. My heart raced. I felt very aware of the fact that my car can't maintain a high speed for long, and that there would be times it would hesitate or slow down, and that might give him enough time to hit me. I merged into the next lane without signaling when I felt my car start to slow a little. He did too. Then I noticed the bridge I crossed into the next city. My city was coming up. At this point, he had been following me for about 5 miles. I figured maybe I was being paranoid. I knew there was no way he'd follow me that far. He had to give up, right? So I tried to calm myself down and took the bridge as fast as I could, trying hard not to look in the rearview mirror. When I felt my car slow, I either merged or started to pull into the next lane, a little like I was going to. He seemed to be copying my moves exactly. 10 miles. I started to think about pulling in somewhere and asking for help, but I had a feeling he would follow or grab me if I tried. I remembered how my mom was once followed and tried to ask for help, only to have the people laugh at her and tried to give her over to her pursuer. I decided to use my knowledge of the area to my advantage instead. I sped up as I approached my next turn, and he sped up too, still grinning. I took the turn wide and stepped on the gas to take off down the road fast before my car could hesitate. By the time he tried to copy me then, it was too late. I was gone. I heard him skid but not crash. By the time he could have recovered, gotten around that corner, I was gone. 15 miles. I never hang around after dark anymore. 25. I want to preface this by saying I am directionally challenged and easily lost. And when lost, I am very much flustered. About 5 years ago, I was heading out to a friend's birthday party at a park in an area of my city that I wasn't familiar with. I only knew one way to get there by heart, so I took it. Eventually, I encountered a detour sign as the road ahead was closed for construction and maintenance. So I followed the detour and wound up painfully lost. So I'm driving around and I don't recognize anything. I'm already sort of upset and confused and I'm way late to this party. I eventually decide to turn around and accidentally cut a truck off switching lanes. He didn't slam on the brakes, not to hit me, but it was a bit rude and I did the hand wave. I'm sorry. A few minutes later, I notice the truck is about a car behind me. Not super weird. Except he's following my random turns while I try to figure out how to get back to where I was. At first I thought it was a coincidence, but as we kept going, I was convinced he was following me. He eventually starts tailgating me, flipping me off, blaring his horn. There aren't many other cars anymore, and I'm absolutely freaking out, and do something really stupid. I pull into a parking lot with the intention of cutting through it to a busier street on the other side. I realize that it's not a through parking lot, but he's behind me and I can't turn around, so I keep going, and it turns into this weird back alley surrounded by grass and between two buildings, which comes to a dead end. So I stop. He stops behind me, turning his truck to block off the majority of the street. So I sit there, my mom on the phone, waiting. He's just sitting in his truck watching me. I'm giving her a play-by-play. I think a good 4 to 5 minutes pass of neither of us moving before he opens his truck door. He's screaming at me, calling me names. He starts walking towards me, then stops and turns around. He leans into his car, then comes back out. This time he's got a crowbar. He's walking toward me again, waving it as he's screaming. I start crying and my mom is calling the police on another phone. She's asking me where I am, and I don't know, and I'm very scared. So I turn my wheel as sharply as I can to the left, decide to go over the curb, which weren't normal curbs, they were very tall, very square ones, and drive on the grass and just gun it. My wheel and front end hit the curb pretty bad on the way up. The strip of grass between the street and building was narrow, and I wound up breaking off my driver's side mirror and scraping my front end up near the headlight. I managed to get around him and tear off down the alley, through the parking lot, and to the closest building I could find, which happened to be a hospital. My mom's on the phone with me the whole time, and the police come to meet me there and take a statement. I told them he was an older man with short grey hair, stained jeans, wearing a highlighter yellow shirt. I described the truck as best I could with my limited car lingo. They kept asking make or model, and I'm like, it was a truck. They were legit annoyed. So they have one of the officers go down the alley where I was to see if he was still there. They found evidence of me driving on the grass and such, but no truck and definitely no man. One of the businesses had a security camera facing the entrance to the alley, and the police eventually were able to get footage. The camera did not get an image of his plates, and the picture of him is from a bad angle and blurry. But it was proof enough with my car insurance company to prove I wasn't just being a reckless dumbass intentionally. In the end, I had a bent rim and a flat tire. My front end alignment was completely messed up, and I needed to replace the driver's side mirror, which, in retrospect, is much better than replacing my skull. They never found the guy, but I'm still super scared of driving around in unfamiliar places. 26. Firstly, let me say I don't think I'm the most attractive, but I am aware that a few things about me tend to be fetishized or something. I get a lot of creepy stares and unwanted attention. But this is one of the most frightening things that have happened to me. I went to a job interview, so I was sort of dressed up. I thought the interview went well, and it was a hot day, so I decided to treat myself and stop at Jamba Juice before heading home. I got my drink and stepped outside. As I dug in my purse searching for keys and phone to call my husband, a voice directly behind me says, "Pretty girl like you should be wearing perfume." I was so startled I didn't know what to do or say. I stumbled a step away from him, nearly falling on the cobblestones in my high heels, nearly spilling my drink, and just remembering that I didn't have my knife with me because it was in my other purse. I straightened myself and gave him a look, then found my keys and headed for my car. Behind me, I heard, "Miss, you dropped this." Without stopping, I looked over my shoulder. It was a fucking receipt for my smoothie. I said I didn't need it. I'm very petite and in high heels, so I wasn't walking fast at all. My heart was already pounding, because this guy gave me the creeps. The way he talked and the way he looked at me. He was the smooth talking type. Anyway, I wasn't moving very fast, but was trying to get to my car quickly without looking panicked. I heard him catching up to me. He said, "I just want to talk. A girl like you should have the finest perfume on her body. I got some samples in my trunk." Oh, hell no. This guy was already giving me a red flag vibe, and now he literally invited me to the trunk of his car. He was now walking alongside me, but a few feet to my left. I said I don't wear perfume and I'm not interested. He stopped and fell behind. I looked back. He was walking back to the storefront. I relaxed a little and slowed down almost to a stop to dig around for my phone again. I was almost to my car when I heard footsteps, fast and quiet, running, but trying to be as quiet as possible about it. I spun around, and the guy was only a few feet away from me. My hand still in my bag, his hand almost in his pocket, I felt adrenaline kick in. Suddenly, I could hear and smell everything. I felt a warmth spread down my arms and legs, and I had incredible calm and focus. I didn't have my knife on me, but he didn't know what I was reaching for in my purse. I decided if he came closer, I could try to use my keys or 5-inch heel. We stared at each other for what felt like a lifetime, but I'm sure it was only a few moments. He said, "You should really come check it out." His voice sounded normal, but the rest of his body was tense. I shifted my grip on my keys in my bag, so they were between my fingers. We never broke eye contact. I said no, and thanked God my voice didn't waver. He put on a strange smile and said, "Okay, maybe next time," and winked with faux cheeriness. He took a couple steps backward, then turned and walked away. I didn't move, this time. I watched him walk all the way back to his car, where he opened his trunk and rifled through whatever was in there. He was definitely far enough away now, even though he kept glancing over at me. I got in my car and drove a few lights before I pulled over, back into the parking lot of the hospital where I had just interviewed. The adrenaline wore off already, and the realization of what happened flooded me with fear. I started crying and finally called my husband. He wanted to come get me, but had no car available. Too far to bus. It was rush hour. He stayed on the phone with me until I was calm enough to drive home. I'm only 4'10", and 90 to 95 pounds. If he really wanted to, that guy could have fairly easily dragged me away. Please, creepy perfume guy, let's not ever meet again. 27. My boyfriend of 5 years and I recently moved to Texas from Iowa, where both our families live, to a new subdivision outside of a small town. The house we bought is at the end of a cul-de-sac, with a large field with nothing but trees behind it. We were both so excited to be starting our new lives together, and to have bought our first house. We also have 2 dogs, basically our children. My boyfriend decided he was going out with some new co-workers to the city, about 35 minutes away. I didn't feel like going as I'm more of an introvert, and large crowds aren't my forte. Also, I usually love being home alone because I can binge snack and watch scary movies he never wants to watch. So after getting home around 6 p.m. from work and the grocery store, I barricade myself and the dogs in my bedroom to commence the scary marathon of awesomeness. Side note, my dogs become on edge when my boyfriend isn't home at night, and randomly bark in the night at seemingly nothing. Freaks me out a bit, but I've become used to it. We have one window in our room that's right next to our bed. I usually have the windows open, letting the night air in, but tonight I only cracked it. So I'm balls deep in some cheesy 80s horror flick, and the dogs start barking. Ah! Stop! I always take notice when they bark, however, just in case. I turn the light on, look around. Nothing. Lights off. Back to the ditch running up the stairs. It's around 11 now, and I'm sure the boyfriend will be gone a couple more hours. No biggie. The dogs start barking again. This time, they don't stop. So slowly, I look out the window. I don't see anything until I catch it. At the bottom of the window, peering up at me, are a set of eyes. Not the whole face. Not even the nose, just the eyes. The window is pretty low to the ground, so this man was crouching down. I thought it was my boyfriend trying to scare me. We sometimes like to do that, but not to this extent. So of course, I try to play it off like I'm not scared. Calvin, you're so dumb. Seriously, it's not funny. The staring continues. Ugh, okay, you're really milking this, fool. Hardy har har, now stop, really. You're freaking the dogs out. Then the eyes slowly start moving. Still on the window, so I can't see the face, but moving across it. Sliding up it now, so I can only see one eye. Until the man is standing up fully. Clearly too big to be my 5'11" boyfriend. I freeze. I've always thought of myself as tough, and from watching so many scary movies, able to deal with sketchy situations. Until now. I literally didn't move, and the dogs still bark. He just stares. I quickly fumble for my phone, finding my voice, and yell at this psycho to leave. I'm calling the cops. That's when he takes a step into full view of me. He just stands there while I dial for the police, stammering over my words. Then I hear something tap the window. It's a large knife on the window, and he must have gotten the reaction he wanted from me because a slow, sadistic smile slides across his face. Knowing full well that the police are coming, he takes one large step backwards and stands there for forever, it seems like. Each step backwards is slow and deliberate, while maintaining the most bone-chilling smile until he reaches the fence, climbs over, still staring in the direction. I see him peek over the fence, one last time, before disappearing into the night. The cops never found him. 28. Background. I'm a female college student and live with my sister in her townhouse in a nice part of northwest Atlanta. She travels most weeks for work, so I'm home alone most of the time, with my dog. One night, I went to the bars in Buckhead with my friend and returned home in a Lyft around 1. I was sober and she was quite drunk. That's important. We go to see my friend, who's the manager of a bar, and prepare to head out. While waiting for our driver, I see 2 guys eyeing us, especially my friend, who is obviously intoxicated. I just figured they were creepers from the bar next door and went on my way. Once we get back, I go to sleep, and she stays downstairs watching TV. She wakes me to complain of my dog acting weird and growling at the back deck, right above the backyard. I figured it was a coyote, and she told me she felt uneasy, and immediately the doorbell rings. It's a man claiming to be from Uber, and that we left the charger in his car, and to come get it. First of all, we took Lyft, not Uber. Second, this guy is a different race as our driver was. My friend insists it's her cord and to turn the alarm off so she can get it. Hell no, it's a trap. I say he's mistaken, and he insists I open the door so he can go home. After politely telling him to fuck off, he attempts to break the door down, so I yell for my friend to get my gun while I go downstairs to set off the alarm so the police will come. I then realize someone is also trying to break in the back door and haul my ass upstairs to find an empty gun case. My sister had hidden it when I had some legal and psychological issues, hence the soberness, and forgot to replace it. So we are trapped with no protection. After a few more terrifying minutes, they give up when they hear police sirens and take off towards the woods. I came back to the bar the next day to get my coat, and my friend told me he saw the creepers as well, watching us, and that they followed our car out of the parking lot, but didn't think anything of it to warn me. Later he tells me there's been reports of serial rape in the area around the bars targeting college girls. I could only imagine what would have happened to us if they had gotten in. So dear serial rapists, I got my gun back. Never come back to my house again. I've got some bullets with your faces on it. 29. My college offers a program for incoming freshmen to live on campus and get to know it better for 2 weeks. So not knowing anyone and being visually impaired, I thought it was a good opportunity to make friends and get to know the campus. So I went. I would come to regret it later. So continuing on the first week of camp, went on without a hitch. I had a good roommate who actually will end up being my roommate in the fall. It was during the weekend. This all started. Me and my roommate got into a habit of relaxing in the evenings by playing cards on our floor lounge with her RA. Every now and then, other people would walk in and walk right back out. Until one night, a guy, his name is Jack, walks in and asks if he can join, and being friendly people, we were like, sure. Now, other than a few weird comments, like basically telling our RA he tried to get his social worker to buy him alcohol so he could make friends, we all kind of thought he was socially awkward. So now the next night comes and we decide we would go play badminton outside. He just so happens to be out there alone, so we invite him to play. This is when his really weird behavior starts targeting me. Like I stated before, I'm visually impaired, so I suck at sports. Well, I can't hit the birdie for my life. He starts calling me names and physically tries to take the birdie and says let me do it. Now at this point you're thinking he's just a little weird. This is when it really gets bad. He becomes attached to me. He follows me to meals and classes, sits next to me at meals, and even if I left early, he would physically run after me to catch up and walk to classes with me. Okay. So at this point, thank God for my roommate, who stays next to me while he follows me around for the next 3 days. And I'm really sorry to her because I used her as basically a wall between me and this guy. Anyway, this strange behavior persists, and eventually even my RA catches that this is really freaking me out. It even starts freaking her out. So on the third day of this, he comes and plays cards with us again, with the same targeted verbal abuse towards me. Then he does something totally weird and takes my roommate's water bottle and says to the RA, "What if I throw this metal water bottle out the window at somebody?" Keeping in mind, we're on the 3rd floor. We all just look at him funny and he says, "I'm just kidding, I wouldn't do that." And the thing is, he has one of those voices you can't tell if he's joking or not. After that, we decide that we were done for the night, and we go our separate ways. Now comes the last night in the dorms. At this point, after him following me again all day, I'm thoroughly freaked out. Not wanting to skip our nightly card game, we ask our RA if we could secretly play in her room, so we could finally get away from Jack. So we start the game. And about 20 minutes into it, we hear him come into the corridor. Each individual room has its own key, but all the floors are opened by the same key, so even though boys were on the 2nd floor, they still had access to our floor. So quickly and quietly, our RA goes up to the door, puts a towel underneath, and a sticky note on the peephole, and locks the door. We hear Jack knock on our door right across the hall. Knock, knock, knock. In succession. Each getting louder and more aggressive. Knock, knock, knock. Then after about 5 minutes, we hear him stomp back down the hall, down to the 2nd floor. I start having an anxiety attack, and I proceed to hide behind my RA's desk in the corner. We continue playing, and another 20 minutes pass. We hear him enter the hall again. Knock, knock, knock. This time it's on our RA's door. I'm shaking in the corner, as we all fall dead silent again with the succession of knocks growing more aggressive. I'm so scared at this point, I'm wishing I had a knife, so my RA hands me a keychain with just this heavy bar meant to be used as a weapon in desperate situations, just to calm me down. I know he's searching for me. This continues until 1 a.m., becoming more aggressive till finally he gives up. Feeling so scared, my RA lets me sleep in her room. So, moving on to the last day. He didn't approach me. He just sat across the room at every class and meal, glaring at me, saying nothing. Instead of running to catch up like usual, he stalks us from behind the rest of the day. Finally, I got to go home and get away from him. Unfortunately for me, I go back this fall and I'm so scared. Jack, really, let's never meet again, because had I been in my room that night, I don't know what would have happened. If anything does happen in the fall, I'll update, but I'm really hoping it doesn't. Just writing this story is making me nervous. P.S. Some of you may say, why didn't the RA do anything, but the simple reason was because it was a summer camp, and we were all adults, so the RAs had no authority. Not to mention my RA was scared herself. 30. Okay. Where I live, there isn't any known murders going on. No crazy assaults in quite a while. Not much stealing either. People generally leave their doors unlocked at night. The only thing that happens frequently here is sexual assault, harassment. So, from the time I was 3, my Nan and Papa grinded into my head stranger danger. Even going as far as to tell 6-year-old me about what happened to a fellow 6-year-old at the time in another state. He was kidnapped, assaulted, and decapitated. Not appropriate for a young kid, and it's continued into my adulthood. Let's just say I can be a little paranoid. So back when I was about 8 or 9, when this first happened, me and my friend Mora, who was a year or so younger, were walking up the hill in our neighborhood from my house to her house. for a homeschooling session together. It was only a 10-minute walk. And 10 in the morning. Our neighborhood, if you could call it that, was houses rather spaced out, and everyone has at least 2 or 3 acres. So we had to pass 5 properties on the right and 3 on the left to get to her house. One of the properties on the right belonged to a neighbor I had seen around, but my grands didn't know personally. In fact, I didn't know anyone who did. He owned a pickup truck and kept to himself. His house was further back on his property, and the property was surrounded by well-maintained bushes. Very secretive. Me and my friend just barely passed the gate to his property, and I hear a car coming up behind us. I see that it's his pickup, and I shrug it off. I'm thinking stranger danger in my head, but I ignore it, thinking, I'm just scared. We live in a safe place. I expect him to turn into his lane, but he doesn't. Instead, he pulls up in front of us and swerves in our path so we can't get past to continue up the hill. I grab Mora and yank her to the side, my head screaming stranger danger and decapitation. And we take off towards the property next to his. We hop the fence and we run into some trees only 10 feet away from the fence. I yank my friend behind the first tree we run by. I didn't want him hearing us or seeing where we ran. He walks up to the fence line and crouches to a child's level and scans the forest, looking hard to see if he can find what he's looking for. He's only 10 feet away, and we're holding our breath to stay quiet. He stands back up after a few seconds and leaves in his truck, heading back up the hill. We freaked out and waited a minute before bolting up the hill. Being the young kids we were, we forgot about it in an hour. We told no one. The stupid kids we were. So flash forward 6 or so years. I'm 14 or 15, and walking with my landlord's dogs up the same hill. Yes, I live in the same place. They didn't walk on leashes because they were relatively well-trained dogs. I only had her black dog with me by the time we got to the same driveway from years prior because the other one ditched and went home. We're about to pass the gate when a larger pickup comes hauling ass out of the lane, and me and my landlord's dog jump back. Jules looks scared shitless, and I'm a bit unnerved too. The guy looks at me pissed and starts to continue pulling out, when big old Jules decides she's not letting him go anywhere. She stands in front of his truck and starts barking and growling. He looks even more upset, and I'm yelling at Jules to stop. She persists for a minute or so until pickup guy stares at her with a fucking angry ass look. Jules immediately stops and runs like hell back towards home. I scream for her to come back, but it's no use. That old dog went fast. I apologize awkwardly to him and start walking back down the hill to go make sure she gets home safe because she never ever acted like that before. Now from this driveway, you can see my lane down the hill. The creepy fuck sits in his truck and watches me walk until I'm nearly to my lane, which creeped me out the whole way, and in my head I'm thinking stranger danger, something's really fucking fishy. He then starts driving, catches up to me before I reach my lane. He's now all smiles, very eager to talk to me. What the fuck? And says, "Excuse me." Me, yes? Creepy fuck keeps driving at my pace. "Can you check and see if my car door is closed? I think it's not all the way." I look at the passenger door and it's fine. I'm really creeped and I pretend to look good and hard at it and tell him, "Looks fine to me." Him, "Well, can you check it? It's really bugging me." I'm not stupid. I was not going in arm's reach of the car. I keep persisting it's fine, and he keeps saying to check it. He's getting more irritated and mad about it and keeps persisting. He does this for a while, and his tone starts scaring me. I flatly say no, then realize I'm only steps away from my lane. I yell, "Your door looks fine, I gotta go, sorry," and run down my lane. Creepy fuck sits in his truck and gives me an angry glare the whole way, while I keep glancing back. creepy fuck then slowly drives past my property, still glaring and angry. I run inside, making sure to tell off Jules for ditching me. I've had other creeps bug me, but this guy has cornered 8 to 9 and 14 to 15-year-old me. Maybe it's coincidence, I don't think so. But I can't rule out how creepy he was at all. So, fucking creep who's cornered me twice, let's not re-meet, as I haven't seen you in months. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to my 30 True Scary Stories special, number 2. Well, I know I said I wouldn't do it again, but I did it again. I said I was going to take my time. I was going to record just a few stories, a little bit at a time, and make the whole job easier on myself. So what I did is I recorded 6 of them, and then ended up doing 24 all at once. I'll learn my lesson eventually. My throat's probably going to be quite sore tomorrow. Ah well, worth it in the long term, I suppose. I think you'll agree we had a pretty damn good haul of stories here. I was kind of picky with them. Not that we don't always have good stories, but I made sure to be especially picky this time. As always, big thanks go to the 30 individuals who allowed me to use their stories. Without them, there's no video. All the stories are actually linked in below. I believe most of them are actually still up, which I was quite surprised. I usually find a few of them have been deleted as I go through and I do these videos, which is why I always save the stories as soon as I get permission to use them. Well, I'm very tired after all that recording. I've been at it for hours. So I think it's a snack for me. And I'll maybe read some Sherlock Holmes or... Oh, I haven't read Planetary for a while. I might break out the Planetary comics. And then to bed, I think that's what it is. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.